Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You're most welcome to this edition of our program, The Woman's Word. Today, The Woman's Word would centers its opinion on illiteracy, ignorance, the catalyst to violence. I wonder what you think about that. But then, we'll have a whole panel to talk on that topic today. We want to note that violence is an action that speaks physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And violence is a human rights problem. Every day, people keep violating one another, and we have violence that grows day in, day out, despite efforts that are being put in place by international organizations, local organizations, individuals, collectively to cut down violence. But we speak of violence in our different milieus, whether in our homes or schools or workplaces, in the community at large. But then we need to still go on talking about violence and looking for ways to eliminate violence in our communities. We need to do that by finding the causes of violence, because if we don't know the cause, we would hardly get to the solution of violence. Permit me, I will go the other way around because the panel is big, and I will go the other way around. I'll let the ladies permit me start introducing the man first. You know, we always say ladies first, so I'll do with the man first. And that man is seated on my left. He's no other person but Reverend Bar Pius. He's a human rights activist, apart from being the man of the word, a servant of God. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
So what are you bringing to this panel today, or to the viewers today, about violence?
Well, first I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this great talk. And like you said in the introduction, we are faced with violence now and then. Violence, sometimes even in the church. It's strange to hear that. Violence in our communities, violence in our streets. So I think by the special grace of God, I will have to perhaps give a contribution on the way we can come out of this violence. Thank you.
Thank you. And to you, Doris Ningo, we say thank you for saying yes to be on this panel today. She's a human rights activist too, and a pedagogue for that.
Yes, Rachel, I want to thank you very much for making me part of this panel. And I want to say that women's rights are human rights. And we want to acknowledge the fact that when we want to emphasize on women's rights, it means that it goes an extra mile. It means that a woman, as a human being, her rights are abused much more than those of men, if we want to stay at that. And therefore, it's always my pleasure to see what I can contribute for us to improve on the situation of women's rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have touched the most important aspects of our society. And when we talk of violence, we always look at the woman and the child. I won't forget you. This is Madame Fomusi. Anyway, she's Mercy Nzele Fomusi, another pedagogue. You're welcome.
Thank you, Rahel. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for inviting me to this program. When we talk about violence, we don't concentrate only on physical violence, but we look at psychological violence, we look at emotional violence, and so many other types of violence. And that is what the woman, goes through in our society.
But if we're talking about violence, we don't want to base it only on the women. We want to go general. Violence in our society. And we want to look at the causes of violence. But I want to pick a particular, or I've taken a particular interest on illiteracy and ignorance. What is your take on that? How do you think, or do you believe that being an illiterate and ignorant can be a reason for somebody to be violent?
To an extent, yes, it is. When you are ignorant, there are several things that you go through and you wouldn't know how to go out of those things. And that is what makes people go through. When you look at cases of violence, you realize that it is mostly those who are ignorant and those who are illiterate who are victims of violence most often. Yes.
But don't you think that those who are even the illiterates themselves do perform or go into being violent without even knowing that?
Yeah, of course they do. They do. Sometimes you find a situation where those who are illiterate themselves, just like you've said, go a long way to, to perpetrate this violence on others or on themselves.
That's true. Doris, I want to understand the aspect where we talk about illiteracy and ignorance as a catalyst to violence. As a human rights activist, as a society, civil society member, you have been fighting in that. Is there in any way that you've come across this situation where illiteracy has been, or ignorance has been the reason why somebody would violate another? Whether the woman violates the man or the man violates the woman, or the violation goes with the children.
Maureen, I'm very happy with the topic that you chose. I want to say here that immediately you talk about illiteracy and ignorance, both of them have to do with education. We don't want to really concentrate whether the education be formal or non-formal, or. But what I want to say is when we talk about illiteracy, we need to look at the other side. When we want to say literate, who is a person who is literate? When we want to look at in the terms of, formal schooling, somebody who is literate is somebody who can read, count, and write. Isn't it? Those are the basic literacy skills. And when you talk about, when we go further to talk about ignorance could be that, it could simply mean that you don't know what you are doing. So it's very possible for you to read, write, and count and be ignorant of so many issues about it around you. And what I want to say here is that this forum is fighting ignorance. Just the fact that you have invited us to this forum to talk about violence, to talk about abuse of human rights, is already sensitizing and educating and looking at ways of getting people informed of a series of issues that gets them that gets their rights to be abused because they don't know, or some others who even do the abuse of the rights on others because they don't know. And sometimes when you explain to them, it's like they get out of sleep and say, I didn't realize that this is what I was doing. So it's very important for us to sensitize and to educate on issues of human rights, on issues of respecting the rights of others, on issues of discrimination, on issues of non-violence, and so forth, and all that it takes to contribute to the respect of the rights of others. Thank you.
Reverend, we didn't keep you aside. We didn't want the ladies to talk all along first, but it's quite important to note, to maybe let the viewers get to understand what they're supposed to know when you talk of illiteracy, ignorance. What are they ignorant about as far as violence is concerned? And what are they illiterate about as far as violence is concerned?
Perhaps let me go religious.
Of course.
God actually, when He created us, He wanted us to live in some kind of unity. God's plan for humanity has been a better plan. God wants people to live without conflict. And that's why in creation story, you find out that even the animals and human beings they could stay together, they could live together, and there was such peace. But you see, when sin came into play, you find out that so many things became wrong. The first murder was when Cain killed his brother Abel. That's where violence started, because sin came in. I think there are a lot of people who do a lot of things and they claim it is out of ignorance, whereas they know exactly what they are doing. Because we all have conscience. I want to talk about conscience. Before you do something, even whether you are literate or illiterate, your conscience speaks to you, tells you this thing you want to do is wrong, this you want to do is right. Everybody created out of the image of God has a conscience, and therefore, before a person gets into any violation, the person is being spoken to from the Spirit. He knows that if I hit you with my fist, it's going to pain you and you're not going to like it. But the person still decides to do it. that I wouldn't say is ignorance. I would say it's an intended act, because sometimes they say, I didn't know that if I did this, this is how it's going to happen. But we people know the repercussion of many things before they even do it, but they give a damn to what they want to do. And I think it's not only a matter of being illiterate or being ignorant that pushes people to commit certain offenses, but I think it's a matter of conscience. People must have a good conscience, a good mind. You must look at others and see that they are also like you. They feel like you, they have emotions like you, and therefore whatever I do to this person, it might hurt and it might cause a pain, and therefore refrain from it.
Very important. Many times people say that violence comes as a result of poverty. But I was thinking that violence wouldn't come, or I had the opinion that violence wouldn't come because of poverty if you're not educated. Do you agree with me? Because if you know how to manage your money or whatever, you wouldn't really, or if you're literate or aware, because I think the opposite of ignorance is being aware. If you're aware of how to manage, you will not be able to, you will not stay poor, because people are poor, that's why they're violent. That's what some people say. But I'm still insisting on the fact that ignorance and illiteracy would lead to that poverty stage. Do you agree on that?
Well, I would rather say poverty is a state of mind. Poverty is a state of mind. People you consider rich are still looking for more.
Okay.
So it's a state of mind. But what I want to say is that when we talk about poverty, we talk about lack. That's what we're trying to talk about, when somebody doesn't have.
Yes.
Now, you agree with me that to an extent, poverty can cause violence. Take, for instance, a man gets up in the morning, doesn't have money in his pocket to give to his wife to cook food for the day. And he's aware that the wife is going to ask him for money, for food money that morning. And he gets up. The first thing he does is put on a very stern face, stern look. That's already psychological violence.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's doing that because he doesn't want the wife to approach him. So the wife becomes scared, even from a distance. And sometimes he will when the wife comes to ask him for money. We're talking about poverty that relates to violence.
Yeah.
And he can just, he can set up an argument, or perhaps that morning set up a show that will prove that he's angry about something that may have happened. And before you know it, the whole issue of supplying money for his family is gone. And maybe if the wife is not understanding and grabs the man when he's going out for his job, he said, you have to give money for food or else you're not going out. Before you know it, there's a whole tussling and struggling, and before you know it's a fight. So to a certain degree, when people lack the means to survive their families, it can cause some degree of violence, beginning with psychological violence and emotional violence that may lead, to physical violence.
But if there was a way that this man, as Reverend has put it, was aware of something, was literate about something, you think there would have been violence in that family?
Sometimes we are literate and sometimes we are aware, but we don't want to behave as people who are aware. Sometimes there are certain things we know, but we don't want to implement them, we don't want to apply them. And that is why you will find somebody you respect so much, somebody you think you can look up to, behaving in a certain way. It is not because that person is not aware of what he or she is not supposed to do, but because that person refuses to put into practice what he or she knows.
In order to make sure that the society goes fairly.
Yeah.
But what would be the link between illiteracy and ignorance? Just a little bit.
Well,
is there a link between these two words, or is there a difference in the two words?
There is. When you are illiterate, first of all, you have there are so many things you are ignorant about. First of all, like Madame defined, illiteracy is when you don't know how to read, nor write, nor count. Mm-hmm. And so, when you don't know how to read or write, you wouldn't know so many things. There's so many things you would not know, And so, sometimes when we're talking about illiteracy, we really cannot separate the two. They go together. Illiteracy and ignorance to an extent, they go together.
because about 53% of the women in our society are violated even though they are literate.
Yes. So just to continue from where she ended, there's if all the information that you need to defend your rights, it's in a book, and you are an illiterate, how do you get to that information? So do you see a clear connection there between illiteracy, ignorance, and violence? Do you want to notice there that based on the fact that you cannot read, there are so many instruments that can be used to defend your right, but unfortunately you don't know about them. What are you there for? You are ignorant, and therefore people keep violating your rights, and sometimes you yourself, you violate the rights of others because you don't have that information. And that's why I want to go back to the fact that I want to congratulate you on programs like this. There are some people who are sitting and listening to us, and it will educate them. But that information, if it were in a book, they will not have access to it. And that's why sometimes some of this information about rights, we'll talk about rights-based approaches, you need to put them in forms of sketches. You need to put them in forms of role plays. You need to put them in forms of, talk shows, so that people get to know their rights, and to get to know so many issues about their rights, which is going to help us in this fight to defend the rights of so many people.
We'll be right back just after this break. The line that separates ignorance and illiteracy is quite slim, given that one is a synonym to the other. That notwithstanding, the dictionary representation of ignorance is that it is an unintentional act of avoiding the awareness of an issue. It is equally an act performed by an individual. Some even go as far as saying that ignorance is an act of unknown, undiscovered, and concealment. This act usually results to insulting with the use of hurtful words like foolish, silly, and more. For those who are not ready to bear the blame or consequences of their actions, will rather refer to ignorance as bliss. It may be so, but many deny that ignorance is a curse, thus a sin. From some schools of thought, ignorance is more evil because the ignorant believes in an issue that does not exist and would fiercely defend it. In the same line, illiteracy or lack of education is simply referred to as one who does not know. It is a lack of skills and knowledge from an educational perspective. It is not an action. It is the skills, capabilities, abilities, and knowledge of an individual, which is usually acquired through some form of education. It was first considered that being an illiterate was not being able to read and write. But that phase has passed, given that modern technologies have been initiated for man to use. Therefore, having less than an expected standard of familiarity with language and literature, or having any formal education, is being an illiterate. There is a possibility that one knows how to read and write, but is unable to discern nuance, making them illiterate. Given that there is a thin line between both words, many pose the question if one can be an illiterate and ignorant at the same time. Making a reference to the Bible, which poignantly states that God's people perish for lack of knowledge, and lacking knowledge is synonym to ignorance. Ignorance does not only refer to illiterate people who have not been to school. It engulfs even those who have been to school. Thus, it is time to break the destructive generational cycle of illiteracy in the homes by focusing on the children, bridging the gap of communication. Applying the act of ignorance and lack of education and the aspect of violence, it would be identified that many a times violence takes place with the performer not being aware of his or her actions. Violence, to many, is a combination of biological, social, and psychological factors, especially those that expose vulnerability, shame, and humiliation. It is a deliberate act that inflicts pain, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. With such a difference in the way violence takes place, it gets easier to treat the situation. But it can be so if the individual is not aware of the state of affairs. Sometimes the individuals play ignorant as to what is happening. It gets worse with those who do not know to read or write. Unfortunate is the case where the victim or survivor falls prey to an opponent who is a few steps literate. Ironically, both parties are ignorant of what is happening. The victim or the culprit is not aware that any form of violence is punishable by law. Society is not very much aware that there is an instrument rectified and still to be rectified that protects human rights. Starting all over again is not a bad idea, inasmuch as it gives the possibility to have some space and freedom rather than being in a bad company. Thus, it is possible that violence can be scaled back if illiteracy and ignorance take the place of literacy and awareness. It is in this light that panels, sensitization campaigns, educative talks, and other exercises are carried out by individuals, associations, and non-governmental organizations. The solution to eliminate violence may not come now, but with time, and that starts with how we raise our children from the day they are born. That would help build a violence-free world with equality and justice. Welcome back. That was a report on illiteracy, ignorance, a catalyst to violence. Talking on violence, I would like to know about illiteracy, pardon me. I would like to know who has to educate the society. I wouldn't want to say who is to be blamed for the violence. I don't want to blame, most of the times when violence occurs, we want to blame somebody. But who has to educate this society that we are in? At the aspect of the church or maybe the school, what do we need to teach the society about so that we don't have violence?
I think we begin right at home. You know, social education, home upbringing is the base for every form of education. I want to believe that parents have a big role to help have a good society. If the kids who are raised at home are not nurtured in a pattern, in a way that can instill in them some degree of humility, some degree of the fear of God, they will grow up to involve themselves into things that will result into violence. So I think the first step we need to take is that parents we must be serious. I'm also a parent. Mm-hmm. We have to be serious in the way we raise up our children, because the Bible says, train up a child in the way he or she should grow, and when he grows, he will never depart from that way. Mm-hmm. If you don't train a child to be humble, to be gentle, to be kind, when your son, your elder son start beating the younger one, or the younger one start punching the elder brother, and you take sides and you don't make a comment, that's the beginning of a more dangerous violence in the future. Because I always like to talk about my prison work as chaplain to the New Bay Central Prison that I am. You find out that many of the inmates, if you ask very well their background, they have a very rough upbringing. some of them are street children. Some have been they raised up by single parents. So all of it. I don't want to take much time to say this, but I want to say that if we have a strong family, social upbringing of our children in our society, we would definitely have a very, very strong and violent-free society.
But Reverend, what are we supposed to teach these children? What are we supposed to tell them? Maybe we'll go with the biblical aspect of it. What are we supposed to teach them? Are they supposed to sit up every day and learn about the Bible or things of the society?
When we grew up, when some of us grew up in the villages, I always say this in my church, and my Christians will always laugh, but I mean, these are facts that people should know. In the village, there are certain traditions and certain norms that you won't violate, because if you did, the village is going to punish you. If you slept with somebody's wife, there was already a clear-cut punishment for that. And so it served as a guide against adultery and immorality. I mean, before even people's eyes were open to Christianity, our forefathers had those type of things. If you stole from a farm, they will hang the thing on your neck that you stole and move you around the village as a form of to put shame on you. So that others who will see you like that, sometimes they will even naked you. They will also learn that if they steal tomorrow, they will be punished in like manner. So that in our modern society that we have our children, we are not saying that they're going to practice all of these things, but we're saying that instill in your child, before we talk about God, all of that, instill in your child virtues. Tell them, teach them respect, teach them love. When you start teaching them respect and love by your own example, the way you live with your wife, the way you speak to your wife, the way you treat your wife, the way the wife treats the husband, that's enough education to preempt certain aspects of violence in the future. If a child finds the mother fighting every day with the father and grows up in that home, that is already enough education to tell the child that fighting your husband or fighting your wife is something normal. And before you know it, she grows up, she gets married, and she starts thinking that the only way I have to resist my husband is to fight him. So I come back to say, before we talk about God, basic social virtues must be planted in the lives of our children. And I'm going to end by saying that the word of God, which is the key, must also take root in your house. God must be at the center of every family. Listen to me. If God is absent in your family, if you don't call God day and night with your children together, there is already an indication that those children are going to grow without the fear of God. And any child that grows without the fear of God, we are going to have a devastating society.
A beautiful one to stay, a devastating society. And that devastating society can only get better with the parents being well educated. How do we handle these parents now? Mostly with you who works for children, parents come up maybe with some kind of habits or attitudes. How do we handle parents who are not morally upright themselves?
To handle them, they need to be sensitized about a wide range of issues. Like in schools, students, they put up some kind of behavior, and then sometimes we are forced to summon the parents. And most often, sometimes we are embarrassed. A parent comes and says, "What do you want with my child? The child never used to behave like this." It's like the school hates the child, So you give them punishment they will not want to do because at home, that is how they are being brought up. And so when we encounter such a situation, we usually take time to educate the parent, to talk to the parent, and by organizing PTA meetings too. During PTA meetings, certain issues are discussed, and that is how we get to educate the parents on how to bring up their children. Because just like the Reverend was saying, that the way you act at home, your children copy. And so it becomes difficult now in a situation where parents are not educated. It becomes so difficult, and that is why the children are sent to schools, and the school has a role to play. And most schools, there is moral education, that people in charge of that people handle such, and then they tell us teachers, when you go to your class, take 5 minutes of your time and try to talk to the children. There are certain things they must know, and teachers help parents to bring up these children in a better way.
I think that's a role played by society in bringing up these children to be morally upright. Madam Ningo, many times people go into violence without really knowing about that. Is it true? They're not aware of the fact that what they're doing is violence, is violating somebody's human rights. So, how can that be handled?
That one is very certain. I think that the issue of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is basically because of things like that. And when you go further to look at instruments like the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, is because of that. And you want to bear with me that at some point in time I said that, but journalists, you were in a workshop, and I said, but journalists, you people are the ones to sensitize and educate. And if they don't know themselves, how are they going to help the society to change? Because journalists are a catalyst for change in society and for respect of rights. They are a very strong force. I mean, in our communities, to say that journalists are the fourth arm of government, if I'm not mistaken, because whatever decision is taken, whatever society needs, they are the voice of the people, and they are the voice of the administrator, they are the voice of the civil society, and the voice of everybody. Sometimes we sit and I have an idea in my mind, a question that I so much want to answer, and when a journalist is interviewing somebody, and I keep saying that, I pray they ask this question, I pray they ask this question, and that's why they themselves need to be very informed in order to probe the minds of everybody who is out there who don't even have the opportunity to do what you are doing. Because sometimes you are sitting in front of a minister, and I pray that you should ask this question, which is in my mind, and more often than not, it is not only in my mind, it's in the mind of so many people. And therefore, if we want that these issues of violence and respect of human rights should be something concrete in our societies, a lot of people need to be educated in these instruments, in the mechanisms, so that when they know, they will help now to get other people to know, and more will see how this fight against the respect, I mean the respect of human rights, it will certainly move ahead. The Reverend Pastor was talking a few minutes ago about him being a prison chaplain.
Yeah.
You see, what are you doing? You are defending the rights of people who are out there. They cannot even. I mean, you get because some of them like that, they are tortured psychologically.
Yeah.
And you are a big consolation to them. And when you go, what do you do to them? You console them using the words of God, but you console them by reminding them also about their rights, and you provide them to know so many things, so that if they get out of there, they will be better people in the society.
Yeah, right.
And you will get them to know that their rights end where the rights of others begin. And therefore, you should not do unto others what you don't want them to do to you. The golden rule. We all know the golden rule. So you see that most of them, sometimes they act, but you need to call them to awareness to say that, look, what you are doing like that. If you pinch me, it pains. Therefore, if I pinch you, it will also pain. So you better watch out not to, if there is food for everybody and you come and eat the food all alone, what have you done?
Yeah,
the right to proper feeding is a universal right. A right to proper feeding is a universal right. And therefore, if all the food that is in the basket, you come and eat all alone, it means that you have abused the rights of others who are supposed to share that food with you.
Right.
And therefore, all that we need to say is sensitization, awareness creating, education. And education, again, I go back to your subject, which is illiteracy, ignorance as a catalyst to violence. Therefore, what we need so much is that education.
Yeah.
We need sensitization. We need creation of awareness. And to get to all of that, you yourself, your capacity needs to be built. They need to build their capacity to know that this is what is supposed to be and this is what is not. And when it happens like this is what we are supposed to do. And before it happens like this is the cause. So if it's possible, you go and dig it from the root, so that you cut it off before anybody gets to that extent of abusing the rights of others. Thank you.
Yes. Well, she said something, about journalists being those to sensitize, and so they have to know so much. I remember a certain program on a certain TV station, which I don't want to mention here. That program helped a lot of women. They talked about issues like this, violence, battered women, They even mentioned the issue of women getting married and then they don't have marriage certificates. And wow, I realized that women in that neighborhood, so many of them, now started discussing with their husbands. What about marriage certificate? And they became aware through this program. What about marriage certificate? It means what we are doing now is cohabitation. We are not married. So some of them whose husbands seized both marriage certificates, they had to start asking for theirs. And so a lot of things came into place, and they became aware of a lot of
stages.
Yes.
Quite important.
But did that cause some degree of violence as well? Knowing your right and fighting for your right can also be a catalyst to violence.
Violence, that's true.
You know, when
That's
people
true.
are not willing to give up people's rights as well, I think it brings a lot of violence. That's why we have all of this violence, you know, nation against nation, communities against communities, and internal struggles and family
Independent
struggles,
fighting.
because somebody is unwilling to give somebody's right, and that is also, you know, a catalyst to other violence. You know, we can say, and you know, last year I was in Ghana at the Kofi Annan International Peace Training Center, and we're attending a conference with all of these guys from all over the world, and there was this guy who came from another religion, not my own religion, and each time I was asked to pray to begin the conference. You know, they will go around normally, and when I prayed, and I ended my prayer through Jesus Christ,
Amen.
your Son, our Lord, Amen. He felt so uncomfortable, you see, and if, to an extent, let me say, if I was not somehow civilized, it could get us into a degree of violence, because he was in another way trying to, you know, he was not tolerant with me, with my religion. And I was trying to be as much as tolerant with his religion, because Christianity is a religion of tolerance, you know.
That's
we all
true.
agree that. And so, you see, when people cannot respect the rights of others and who they are, you know, it brings violence. And that's why we have all of this fighting and so on and so forth going in. And I think one of the ways we can avoid violence is to see in others the way we see ourselves. If you know that you love yourself, no one beats his own body, no one hurts his own body. If you love yourself, then know that the other person next to you needs to be loved.
Of course.
You know, it was
Very
St. Francis of Assisi who said the prayer that help me to love someone as to be loved.
Yeah.
You only want to be loved, you don't want to love others. So I want to pray that to an extent, in order for us to reduce this degree of violence, whether they are psychological violence or emotional or spiritual violence, we should be able to see in others, cultivate the attitude of seeing others like you see yourself.
We are going to hear from many others. We're going to hear from the society. We're going to hear from people on the streets, their own opinion about ignorance, illiteracy, a catalyst to violence in the Vox Pop. We'll be right back.
We should first of all understand that violence is something that really stop people from behaving properly in our society. Then illiteracy as well is another issue that has to be handled with a lot of care, because when there is violence in a family, it affects the psychological situation of a child. It affects the entire family. It affects the wife, or either the entire family, like I said some minutes ago. Then the family cannot well educate the children or send them to school.
When you talk of illiteracy, I don't think illiteracy is still very prominent in the world, because there are very enclaved areas where they are completely cut out from civilization. But if you move there, you will see the way they behave, and you understand. They don't even go to school, but they are not violent. Violence is a matter of individual behavior, behavioral attitudes vis-a-vis a particular society. They are influenced by societal issues. Illiteracy, yes. Maybe like saying somebody cannot read and write, and the person is influenced to or is dragged to be violent. To me, I don't think so. But if you talk about ignorance, good. Ignorance on violence, to be ignorant on, you might be violent when you're ignorant of certain things. Again, how many percent? Otherwise, the whole society will be violent every day. But a few people might be ignorant and a few people might go violent. But I still say it's a matter of an individual. Yeah, so I don't think ignorance as such influence people to be violent, be they men or women. But of course you start have to define violence, what violence is. Or is it psychological or physical violence? I think it goes both ways. It goes both ways. But my fear is the society should educate. That's education will be just informing people about the dangers of doing this, okay, or the good of doing this. Yes, be good. Don't hurt. If somebody picks up a gun and shoots you, right, you might have a small scuffle, but if people can understand that, okay, this is a brother, this is a sister, or it serves no purpose of shooting you because of 100,000 francs or even 10,000 francs, because I've known people who have killed others for 50 francs, yes, which is very insignificant indeed. So it's a matter of just educating the people and let the people know that to do good is good.
A two-way question, and then I'll first of all think yes, ignorant, because somebody who is literate, who is up, has something upstairs, knowledge upstairs, or there are certain situations which you think exercising violence on somebody might lead to some kind of funny situations, which if you are literate, that fact can just help for you to avoid that kind of situation. But somebody who is not literate may just act out of instinct and maybe regret after, just because the fact that he is not literate and he could not retain his emotion that very period because he was not reasonable enough. But I want to think the two is a both way thing. Being literate helps you in some way to avoid some kind of cases when it comes to violence, and illiteracy is a little motive too that can push you to be violent because the reasoning faculty is really low.
People who have a certain level of education know exactly their limits when they have to do something, okay? Now, whenever you have to do with somebody that has to handle a situation, be it a man or a woman, if the person is not straight in the head, like he's not educated enough, he or she would always go the violent way, okay? That's how we can easily relate violence to illiteracy, right? Now, when it comes to situating both things, we would say people get violence because they have their own issues, personal issues, because they have their own personal frustrations, right? And those frustrations lead them to being violent towards the other person who is like opposite them or who is like with them. So I believe that those who are educated enough, truly, without any apprehension or whatever, cannot go that level. Would always try to solve their own problems in one way or the other without going the violent way.
I think illiteracy and violence can be a real catalyst to violence because once you're an illiterate, there are certain things that you don't know. You behave like those people in the quarter. Let me put for instance, that's how we call it like in the local parlance. There are laws that you don't master, and so you find yourself in certain things that you don't understand, and it pushes most of them to react without knowing. So I think violence is another form. We know people who are literate have their own form of violence. Probably they do it with how will I put it, with a lot of energy, with a lot of intelligence. Thank you. You see, whereas an illiterate will do it vaguely, will do it without even knowing, without any control.
I'm not quite comfortable with the word illiteracy. Maybe ignorance, because illiteracy has nothing to do with education. Education is much more large and has to do with somebody being able to understand a number of things. It has nothing to do with school education or issues that happen with the society and so on. So yes, education has something to do with violence. Education and ignorance has something to do with, if you have somebody who is not properly educated, he would interpret things the wrong way and will resort to violence. By the way, if you see somebody who resorts always to violence, the person has there's something wrong with his education, because there is no society, there is no religion, there is nothing within our modern framework that prones violence. Violence justifies nothing. Those who are prone to violence use things that are not valid to justify violence. Religion. There is no religion that justifies violence, that would encourage violence. But people use religion to justify violence. Even education, style of life, and so on and so forth. So yes, I don't want to say there is justification for violence. But yes, who is to blame? Who is to blame? Is the individual is to blame. The society is to blame. But above all, the way we all, as human beings, perceive issues. If a child becomes violent at a particular age, I want to think that the parents have something to do with that violence. The way you bring up a child will determine what that child will be tomorrow, and that really matters. Violence, as I will repeat, does not solve any problem. So who is to blame? Just everybody has a role to play in whether we become violent or not.
Thank you. That was quite expressive. That was quite expatiating. Many people have different opinions as to what violence is and how it is linked to illiteracy and ignorance. Now, the next question I have in my mind is, most at times people get violated. They don't even know that they are being violated. Reverend, do you agree?
Well,
Yeah, because there's some cultures. I learned that in some regions in Cameroon, it's a culture to batter your wife. You show her that you love her. If you don't beat upon her, she wouldn't accept that you're showing her love. That's what I learned. Do you agree on that? Anyway, I learned. I followed. I listened
I
to
think you
other.
should ask that question to Madame Sele.
Madam
Because women always like to complain about being violated.
Because that's what I learned. Some regions here in Cameroon, violence is part of them. It's a sign of love.
Yes, if the women themselves don't see any problem with what their husbands are doing to them, then it's not violence.
But
And
Madam,
this is a normal lifestyle.
to them,
And so they will not complain, because I have seen cases where, as soon as the man comes back from work, the woman starts problems. I've had neighbors like that. And the next thing you hear plates breaking and, crying and all that. And when, at one time I tried to find out from her why she would allow a man to violate her to this extent. And she told me in French, "J'aime ça."
oh my G, she really loves it.
But I have a practical story. When we were growing up, my mother, we in Kumba, we stayed in one quarter, which is a popular quarter, Hausa quarters. I mean, I don't know what is always with Hausa quarters. And there was this man. He was a truck driver, and he was I don't know. He was engaged to a woman who had 6 children. They were not his own children. It was rather the last child that was his own child. And this man was a hard worker. I mean, a very hard worker. And when he comes back home, and he wouldn't even find food on his table. And the wife will always ask for money. And I remember this day, I was still very young. I think I was about 7, 8, or 9 years old. And there was this morning when the woman asked him for money, and he didn't have the money. In fact, the woman was a huge woman. I don't want to call it a village because you will just know the kind of women. And I want to tell you that this woman beat this man up.
Oh my!
And beat him up mercilessly and sent him under the bed.
Without food.
This is a true story. and this woman slept with another man
on that same bed.
When the man was under the bed. I'm telling you a true story. I'm a pastor. And when I was growing, I was young. I used to ask myself. I said, why would this man run away? Why wouldn't he run away? What's really keeping him? You say it's a charm. Well, if you say it's a charm, that's too mean to say that. But I think that some people say love is blind, but love has eyes today.
Yeah.
And I think this man was drowned in the love for his wife, that he didn't see the wife violating him.
So to love.
And that goes to say that some people can be violated without
knowing.
actually knowing that they are being violated. Because I wasn't big enough to go ask him, because I had so many questions in my mind. Perhaps if I knew him, I would have asked him now. But as a young boy growing up, I think if I had the opportunity to talk to him, I would have asked him, why will he allow himself to be messed up by a lady and still not react, still not move out? And he's the one giving the money, feeding the pay the fees of other children. And so that goes to say that, because if he felt violated, perhaps he would have reported the matter to authorities. He didn't report the matters to authorities. He didn't take any action. He was just there. He kept on, and these things went on and on and on. And that's why many people are suffering under this yoke of violence, and they are not reporting.
Yeah.
A woman is raped. She doesn't talk. She sits quiet, saying, no, if I say it, it will bring a shame on me. So the child is not being sponsored by his or her parents, and she doesn't report to social welfare. You say that she's afraid that my father will be this or that. You know, we have to expose violent cases. We must not only talk about it, we must report it to authorities. We must speak out, we must cry out. And it's not only about women being violated, like I've shown in the other cases. Children are being violated as well. Workers are being violated. You know, so all of these people must speak out, must be able to condemn. You know, Archbishop Desmond Tutu will always say that the church is the voice of the voiceless. You know, when he was president of the All African Conference of Churches, he will always speak to the church. So if you are violated and you cannot even talk to your pastor, I'm a pastor, I won't be able to give you a spiritual counseling to help you come out of your violence, or perhaps give you a counsel for you. So people must speak out. You must. One of the ways to fight violence is to speak out.
That's quite important. But now, who do we speak to? Who
Yes.
do we talk to? That is where we have the problem. Because most of the times, we do not know the quarters in which we need to enter for our problems to be solved.
Yes, where the pastor ended, I think it's a very important aspect of fighting violence. Breaking the silence and speaking out. And now, where do you go to? He started talking. You can go to your pastor. You can go to the social welfare. You can go to human rights activists. You can go to NGOs that defend the rights of women and advocate for peace. You can go to the social ministries like the social welfare. You can go to the Ministry of Women and the Empowerment and the Family. And you can go up for legal advice, even to those to lawyers. You can go up, even right up to the police, the gendarme. It's a whole range of them. But our problem sometimes is not even so much where these people have to go to speak out.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, the means to continue to defend them. There are some people who actually take off and go and meet the people and talk that this is the problem that I have. But then, can they afford, when they have to reach a level of a lawyer, to pay for a lawyer to follow up the cases of abuse of their rights?
Yeah.
They cannot. And therefore, that's why NGOs are doing a lot of work in our communities. There are NGOs that have human rights lawyers that are ready to defend cases of abuse of rights all the way to the end, and they are sponsored, and they are sponsored by other funding bodies.
Yeah.
You have an organization like WCIC, it's in Bonamusadi. It's a group of advocates,
Yeah.
a group of female lawyers that they do counseling, they advocate, and they defend women pro bonus, that is without fee. So women need, to know that places like that exist, and there are so many other human rights centers here that you have in the Catholic Church, you have a Justice and Peace Committee that they also defend the rights of people. And therefore we need to get people to know that structures like that exist, and that if they want to speak out, if they don't know what they really need to do, they can move to places like that and speak out and explain exactly what has happened to them, and they will help them. And if you people of the media, because you have a very important role to play, can sometimes just display some of those cases, that these are the cases, this is what happened, and this is how it was followed up, and this was the end. It will also be a way of sensitizing and educating and raising awareness for people to know that it happens. I saw one time on the TV that it happened like this, and this was what happens, and this is what came out. And it will sensitize a lot of people, and will improve on it.
Where to go to?
Yeah.
We watched a short movie when I was in this conference in Ghana on the genocide that took place in Rwanda.
Yeah.
And there was this lady who was violated, and by close to 5-7 soldiers, and she ran to a police station to report the act of violence that had taken place. And guess what? The police people were interrogating her, asking her,
how
did you enjoy it?
Oh my G.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
Making a mockery of the violence.
And she's feeling pain.
Yeah, and I think those cases is not only in Rwanda, but I think there are cases like that within our country where people are violated and they go to report simply because they don't have the means to defend themselves. Someone is violated. A cocoa buyer, is in the village, is dealing with people on 10 bond 10. I don't know what 10 bond 10 is. Gives 10,000, and the cocoa season takes back another 10,000 addition to it, and sometimes they just mess around with all these cocoa producers, and they take their produce, and if they have to lay a complaint, the cocoa buyer just goes up to the whosoever and use his money.
And remember, and they say that justice is the most corrupt.
The violence is there, it's ongoing. Nobody can ever be able to handle it, because those who are supposed to
defend their rights,
defend the rights of those who have been violated, their mouths have been interrupt, and they can no longer speak. It's a cartoon where a big man sits in the office, and there's dollars and CFA in his mouth. He can no longer speak out because
of course, because it has been blocked.
It has been blocked with money.
It's with pipe.
So we stand to say here with a very strong voice that if you are in a position to defend people who are violated, you have to do it, because first it's your job to do it, and secondly you have to do it because God commands us to do that. He says, where the righteous rule, the people flourish, and when the wicked rule, the people will perish. So I want to believe, and I'm speaking to you, I know perhaps you listen to me and you can be in that position of authority. My prayer for you is that you will take people's problems, issues seriously when they come before you in your office, because it's painful. Unless you be in the shoes of that person, you can never understand what people go through. And so if somebody reports a case to you about a case of violence or being violated, please, I want to encourage you to sit down and think twice and act, so that justice can take its course.
That's why I always say that there are times that we look at handicaps, a lame guy walking around, and you're laughing at him because he's lame. I don't know what I'll put it. Unfortunately, the word or this life is a circle. In the next 2 seconds you can become a a handicapped
That
person
is a
too.
boomerang.
Of course. So if somebody is being violated and you know you can help that person and you don't do it, don't forget that it can become your turn someday and it will happen. But then I want to look at this because we just talked about people laughing, the policeman laughing at the woman who was being violated, and some of the times I think when place where somebody was saying that she had a problem, she went up to the court to complain, and the women there turned to mock at her. Anyway, she was going through a divorce, and the women there mocked at her.
That's why many people
see,
don't like to speak about their
That's what I
life.
wanted to say. Do you want to think? I wanted to ask if that should be one of the reasons why people don't talk about their violent cases, their situations.
That's
It doesn't quite for something.
Zele?
Yes, that could be one of the reasons why people wouldn't want to talk about what they are going through. And thank God we have Mai here who has given us, names of where we could go to that I did not know. And thank you very much. At least now people know where they can go to. When you go to this place and you are being mocked, you will know that you can go to some other place. And so people should not sit down there and keep all their problems to themselves. There are people they could talk to. There are places they could go to, and their problems will be given a solution.
Thank you. Melaningo, you're going to say something?
yes. I just wanted to go a bit religious again and say that a few days ago, one of my friends sent me an inspirational message, and the message was that it is better to cry on a shoulder than to cry alone, and that has stayed with me to the extent that this morning I think we heard about a young man jumping into the river Buri and leaving a message that in fact everything in the world is bad. That is, he has given up on life because everything is bad about life. He does not see any reason for living, and that young man jumped. And I want to say that I'm emphasizing on this fact of speaking out. If this young man could go for counseling, he would not have committed suicide.
You're right, you're right.
And therefore, no matter what is happening, we still need to continue
To talk.
encouraging people that they should speak out and they should talk. And I want here also to say that all of us, every human being should consider themselves a counselor. And they should always take it very seriously when somebody says, I want to talk to you. I have something I want us to discuss. No matter how busy your schedule is, find time and listen to that person. That could be a life-saving statement that you will make for that person.
I agree.
That's a strong point. Don't forget, violence is punishable by law. Whether we like it or not, apart from being counselors or individual guidance to one another, violence is punishable by law. So we need to understand that. And I think that we have a lawyer who gave us his opinion about this aspect that violence is punishable by law.
I wish we had a. I talked earlier of the rule of law, a judicial system that is very transparent and that answers the issues, that societal issues that are brought to it. Now, but you should not just complain without reporting. I know of situations where men have been sent to prison for violence on their wives. We know where situations where parents have been imprisoned because they beat their children, sometimes for violence, put in prison for violence. It's easier to complain, but I would prefer that people complain. There are NGOs, there are civil society organizations that take charge of issues like this. There is no way you would accuse the government, accuse the justice system without first of all complaining. Complain, raise awareness. It's important. If your husband beats you, if your parent puts you through torture and you sit quietly, then you are also you encourage that situation. If you are oppressed and you do not complain about the oppression, then you encourage the oppressor. There is no way, and I repeat, our society, our laws sanction the people who are violent on others. It's important. Let's take note of that. If you are faced with a situation of violence, of torture, mental or otherwise, it's important to seize the courts. If you think the courts are a bit more complicated to seize, go to the police and report. Let it be noted that you reported somebody. If you are illiterate, if you cannot read or write, go and ask the police officer to take down your statement. It is your right. Go and ask the police officer to take down your statement. If you are afraid to go to the police station, look for civil society organizations that handle issues like that. If you are still afraid to do that, or if you cannot do that, look for the social affairs services. They have specialized units that handle violence, especially domestic violence. It's important that we note that. It's important to note that the right institution, so that tomorrow you can say you reported. Tomorrow, you, the victim, can say, I drew the attention of the social affairs services, I drew the attention of the police commissioner, and they did nothing. But don't sit quiet. If you are a victim of something, please report.
All right. Thank you. That was quite interesting. Before we go away, we won't let these ladies and these gentlemen to leave us without something quite important. They have been quite touching, going straight to the point. I am so excited that I get to find out that there are bodies, there are instruments that we can use. I hope those instruments are not only for the women. Even the men too can go to that, to make use of those instruments.
That's very certain. When we say that we are defending the rights of women, even the men defend the rights of women. Mm-hmm. You understand? Some of those instruments that I quoted, I think all of us know that it's not only for women. It's not only for women. If you are going to the social welfare, it's not only for the women. Mm-hmm. If you are going to the forces of law and order, it's not only for women. If you are going to your church minister, it's not only for women. That's certain. Mm-hmm. That's certain. So, but what I just want to say is that with relation to women, when they held a platform of Beijing in 1995, is because the violence against women was too much. The discrimination against women was too much. And that's why they came up with special temporary measures that even if they are discriminatory against the men, they should be applied in order that they can at some point get women to come up in par with men with the respect of human rights. Because women's rights were being when we come simply to our penal code in Cameroon, you people know the law against adultery. Yeah, I mean, all of us know kind of like how it applies to man and how it applies to the woman. How they will say that, oh, the man, they must catch you on your matrimonial bed and many times before they can claim that it's adultery. But the woman, they just need to say that that's a woman entering a hotel room with a man, and that is it, and they condemn the woman. I think we know that there are those kind of, and there are so many, they abound. And that's why I want to say that when you are saying that you hope they don't apply only to women, I want to say that those special temporary measures were allowed and validated by the United Nations because of those kind of things that were exaggeratedly discriminatory against women.
Thank you. So what can we tell this society? Is it good to go to school and be aware of some certain factors that will encourage us or that will uplift us in order that we don't get violence?
Of course, school is very important. Being educated is very, very important. And I can tell you that nowadays, so many women are going back to school. In the evening schools, you find married women who had dropped out years ago, and now they have come to self-realization that education is the best. And they are going back to school and they are making it. And so it is very important to be educated, because when we are educated, there are certain things that will not pass us by.
Without getting to it. Madam Ningo, I would love Reverend to be the last, because it's really going to give he was going to hit the last nail.
Okay, we have been talking about illiteracy, ignorance as a catalyst for violence. And I want to say that we should start by fighting the level of illiteracy in our community. We should see how we can improve that every single Cameroonian should be educated. That is, they should have the basic literacy skills. Literacy skills. I think while we are evaluating the Millennium Development Goals, I think Millennium Development Goal number 2 had to do with universal education for all.
Okay.
Those are things that we should start already at policy level and at a personal level, and see how we can encourage that every little child should be able to have at least the first certificate of primary school elementary education, because it is beginning from there that no matter what is happening, they can read. Every child, because the terminal competency is that by the time the child is leaving 6 years of primary education, they should be able to read, write and count. So we should start by emphasizing on those, and they will get now to be illiterate and to eliminate ignorance and to reduce violence in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend, while you speak, small words come in, words of advice. We want a big one now.
Yes, I want to end by saying that C.S. Lewis, a great philosopher, once said, educating people without religion is producing clever devils. Educating people without religion is producing clever devils. And if our country, Cameroon, will say for a job employment, you have 4 ordinary level certificates excluding religion, that is the beginning of violence. And I want to speak to authorities to know that we must address that issue in order that we may have a free, violent society. Because when we train children academically without God in them, then we have just trained them for warfare.
Thank you very much, Reverend. I wouldn't know what to say anymore, ladies and gentlemen. You heard it all from the horse's mouth. If you permit me, call them that. They are the horses, and they've just given us what we need to know today. And I hope that you all understood or you got the message. Illiteracy, ignorance is a catalyst, or one of the catalysts to violence. And we need to cut down that aspect in our society by being educated and by being aware of what is happening around us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us. We hope that we'll be together again in another or subsequent edition. Bye-bye.